right, well, thank you for joining Discover the SDGs, convened by the Conscious Fashion Campaign in collaboration with the United Nations Office for Partnerships. I'm Leonie Meyer and I work at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and the Food and Agriculture Organization, where I focus on wood-based fibers, and have also been involved in the establishment of the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion, which was launched last year, and work is ongoing. For today's session, Innovative by Nature, I'm joined by Trisha Carey, Director of Global Partnership and Global Business Development Apparel at Lenzing, by Jed Fink, who's Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability at Allbirds, and Samantha Sims, Sam, Vice President, Environmental Sustainability and Product Stewardship at PVH Corp. It's amazing to have you all here at this really exciting panel. And I only gave really brief introductions because you have very impressive CVs. So I thank you for joining, and I would like to ask each of you to just briefly present your work. So let's start with you, Trisha.
Great, thank you. Thanks today for everyone being together to have this important discussion. So at Lenzing, we manufacture fiber from trees. So we transform trees into viscose, modal, and lyocell fibers, which we brand as Tencel. And my role within Lenzing, I'm involved in business development and really support developing collaborative partnerships throughout the supply network, as well as communicating with retailers and brands to optimize the value that they have in using Tencel, lyocell, or modal.
Thank you, Trisha. Great to have you here. Let's move on to Sam.
Hi, well, thank you again for having me, and it's great to be here with all of you virtually. So at PVH, I'm responsible. PVH, for those who don't know, is a large apparel company. We own brands such as Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger and a number of others. And so we look at our corporate responsibility work through the lens of what we call forward fashion. We look out over 10 years now, going on, I guess, 9, but out to 2030, and look out across human rights and environmental initiatives. And I'm responsible for the environmental sustainability side of that work, looking across owned and operated, supply chain, and then how we make product. And so thrilled to be here and can dig into some of those more specific topics as we get into conversation.
Thank you, Sam. Let's last but not least to Jed.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm Jed Fink, and I get the privilege of leading innovation and sustainability at Allbirds. We are a lifestyle brand, about 4.5 years old now. We are headquartered in San Francisco, California, but our heritage comes from New Zealand, which you can see in the background behind me. And Allbirds was launched with a mission to make better things in a better way. And so we try to take a lens of comfort, design, and sustainability into every product we make, and to give consumers choices where they can bridge the gap between what they feel like they should buy for the betterment of the planet, but also what they want to buy when no one's looking, the thing that makes them look good and feel good. We want those things to be the same thing. And so we try to harness natural materials, and one of our most exciting platforms is our tree platform, where we've been partnered with Lenzing and their Tencel lyocell fiber since the very early days of Allbirds, and it's one of our strongest platforms, and we've got a lot more on the pipeline with it as well. So excited to talk about this important topic today.
It's really great to have you all on board. As you know, we have 10 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is really the decade of action, and yeah, and I think it's really important also that you know, as private sector representatives are really here to have this conversation with us. Let's start with Sustainable Development Goal 15, which is Life on Land. And the mission there is to really sustainably manage forests, to combat desertification, to hold and reverse land degradation, hold biodiversity loss. And recently, actually, at UNECE, we organized the SDG 15 Day, a webinar where also Trisha took part, and it was really to assess a bit the progress, where we stand in achieving SDG 15, and also like this was an important opportunity to realize that we can really only achieve all the goals if we do it together globally, across sectors, across spheres of society. So super important. And I think the fashion industry as a whole, as we know, has really profound impacts on the environment and has a really important role to play in the achievement of SDG 15, from fiber production to retail and beyond. So I really want to just quickly ask you, what role does fashion innovation play in restoring and protecting nature, you know, from the perspective that you have in sustainability in your companies? Trisha, let's start with you.
Yeah, so at Lensing, sustainability is really the foundation for everything that we do. And we have a platform that we call Naturally Positive. And that's our way of thinking around sustainability. And we originally thought of, okay, so we make fiber from trees, from wood, but we realized that it's so much more than that, and that we have to have this contribution to a better world working together. And that's where we developed our strategy around Naturally Positive. And we want to be this driving force for change by working collaboratively. And that's why, you know, it's nice in this conversation to have two of our brand partners, being Allbirds and PVH. So we actively contribute towards improving environmental performance throughout the value chain, as well as looking at the social aspects. Within our platform of Naturally Positive, we have 7 core challenges that we are working towards. And we actually base these specific targets and connect them back to the UN SDGs. And they revolve around our raw material security, water stewardship, sustainable innovations, empowering people, partnering for systemic change, enhancing community well-being. And this is really the basis that we have in order to make our fiber.
We know a lot about this work, as we also run the Forest for Fashion initiative at UNECE. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that from you. Let's move on to Jed. You lead the innovation and sustainability at Allbirds and have been pretty much there since the beginning. And now Allbirds is quite a big company with more than 20 stores across the world. What is Allbirds' vision in relation to its environmental impact? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, like I said, so our straightforward mission when we started was to make better things in a better way. And we've gotten more, we articulated that a bit more recently, where we want to reverse environmental impact through better consumption. And so rather than just trying to have less and less of a problem or be less and less of a negative impact, we actually want to use materials that can actually help absorb carbon as one major example. Materials that through their use can actually restore the planet and not just do less and less negative impact. So that's our future vision. And again, we started as a merino wool shoe company with one product for basically our first year. We have now since evolved into several shoe products. We introduced our tree platform with Lensing's Tencel lyocell. And now recently we've moved into apparel, and we're really excited. We think that, again, anywhere that we can bring that lens of comfort, design, and sustainability, and if we see something where we don't think that consumers have a real choice between what they should buy and what they want to buy, or that they can't find a choice that fits that, then that's an area where we feel like there's some improvements that can be made, and that's an area where we can play in. But it's all about harnessing natural materials and trying to delight customers in ways that they're not used to. I still think a lot of them are delighted to understand, what does a tree fiber really mean, right? And so through our storytelling, through our direct-to-consumer storytelling, you know, at the end of the day, they walk in the store and they say, hey, the wool shoes, okay, that's soft and cozy. What about tree? We call it light and breezy, and we keep it real simple, but it's that beautiful cooling sensation of the tree fibers from Lensing, and it actually makes the product better, which is a really core strategy for us. We don't want sustainability to be some sort of big compromise where there's the normal product and then there's the sustainable one that doesn't work quite as well. not only do we want it to be equal, we want the sustainability elements of it to make the product better. And so the tree fibers in our shoes make the product better. They're the reason people love them. And so that's a big core strategy for us. We're not just stuffing nature into products. We're actually harnessing it in new ways, in ways that make the product better. And that's the power of a business, right? If you can make something, we're in a business, right? Our power is only as much as people want to purchase our products and use our products and make better choices with our products. So making the product better, harnessing nature, that's really our vision.
Can I ask back just a very quick critical question? Because your company has grown so much, do you see that there could be a problem with increasing demand for materials, and then of course the kind of scale aspects, which I think a lot of big companies are facing, where you kind of the sustainability aspects then become undermined by just the sheer scale of it? Do you see that as an issue, or is that not at the core of the problem?
It's actually something we ask ourselves every day, but we've made a deliberate strategy to say, look, if we're going to have the effect that we want, the reason we started this business, we didn't just kind of decide one day in a long history of, hey, now we got to get sustainable because that's what everyone wants. We started with this. We said, does the world really need more stuff? No. Does it need better stuff? Do they need better choices? Yes. That's really the reason we jumped into the game. And so we said, hey, if we want to change the way people buy and make things, then we're going to need scale. And so we're not ashamed of that. We're absolutely trying to grow, but we have to do it through that lens. If we can't bring comfort, design, sustainability to a new category, to a new product, then we got to keep working on it. And we haven't really even hit our own targets, let alone get customer permission. But we're not ashamed of scale, especially if we can bring along a greater appreciation for how things are made. We try to name the products as simply as possible to connect people with where they come from. Wool runners, tree runners, sugar. We had a sugar zephyr, and we've got all of the we call it sweet foam now. So it's a sugarcane based sneaker foam that is in every single one of our products. Not just a small sustainability collection on the side, but every single one of our products. And we've helped over 100 companies get access to it. So we've been deploying that around the world. But that only comes with growth and scale and influence. So we want to change the way people make things. We do want it to be bigger, but we also want to connect them with where it comes from and key certifications. So we work with Lensing and the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, to make sure that the starting point is being done properly, right? Just trees is not enough. It needs to be sustainably harvested trees with the gold standard of sustainable forestry. And so we work with Lensing to make sure 100% of our tree products have that certification. And so if we can help raise the awareness of those kinds of certifications, we've got similar ones for wool and sugarcane, then we think scale is great on that, because we want more customers saying, okay, well, where's your certifications? Cool, you've got natural products. Where does it start? What's your certifications? How do you make sure that there's the right things are being done all the way through the chain? So we're actually excited about scale. We think it's necessary to have an influence bigger than just our own company.
And I think you already mentioned a bit also consumer awareness. We're gonna cover that a bit later on as well. So I think that's also a really, really important aspect. Let's move on to Sam. You lead environmental sustainability in one of the largest global apparel companies with brands like you said, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger. I think all of us know. Can you tell us, I mean, surely there must be environmental concerns along the supply chain. How do you tackle those? What is the strategy?
Sure. Well, and there were so many interesting themes in there that Trisha and Jad picked up on. So I'll try to connect some dots too. But I think first and foremost, I mentioned what we call our forward fashion strategy, looking out to 2030. So is central to that, there are 15 SMART targets. They're all mapped beautifully through our CR report to the SDGs, which is always a nice little cheat sheet to see the relationships between that work and the different SDGs. But as a big part of that, I would say we start in terms of the supply chain with looking at, are we measuring, what are we measuring? So we understand what our footprints are. We really believe, and I think to the points around scalability, and we believe a lot in industry standardization, especially when it comes to measurement tools, that in our case, and many other companies using the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's facility environmental module to try to make things easier and streamline the evaluation process, the performance measurement process for suppliers. So starting there to understand the base and understanding environmental performance of our suppliers, then we really look at remediation and capability building and improvements bit by bit. And so sometimes many times I think we take an approach of looking at where can we drive industry scale. So for example, we work with the Apparel Impact Institute, which is kind of like a sister brother group of the SAC, where they're driving awareness and an incremental change around energy efficiency, and increasingly starting to move into how you can drive renewable energy into the supply chain. Highly complex and different based on the municipality, the jurisdiction, the local laws, the local energy infrastructure. But so that's the path that we looked at in terms of measure, improve, and then try with those improvements to drive scalable systemic changes that will go on and on far beyond PVH's involvement there. There's also a huge piece of that work in engaging with the supply chain, and we're increasingly doing this and looking through the lens of the product. So, there's been a lot of discussion around the raw material selection. And so working to really work with suppliers and your strategic suppliers who are touching those key and core products where you can drive the most sustainable attributes through those products that are critical to our customers, and that we see the customers purchasing a lot. So we're a big house of underwear. Underwear is a core part of our business. And so as we look at sustainable materials and fibers, really thinking about how can we transition the materials used for our core products to be even more sustainable and eventually create circular models. So our goals, when we look at those 15 targets that I referenced, there are targets that squarely you could say, oh yes, that relates to supply chain sustainability, but really you have to look at also our targets around regenerative materials. So moving toward 100% sustainable cotton by 2025, 100% sustainable poly by 2030, 100% sustainable viscose by 2025, and then how we're working to, by 2025, have at least 3 of our most commonly purchased products fully circular on the market by 2025. And all of that takes innovation. Just your early question, both innovation from not just the technological solution-based innovation, business process and new revenue, new distribution models, but also process innovation and thinking about things differently, both internally with our companies and then with our supply base. And I could even argue across the value chain. If that answers your question, Yoni.
Definitely. And I actually have one more question.
Sure.
All the info you gave.
Sure.
You mentioned circularity. For someone, for example, who is little familiar with circular strategies in the fashion industry, can you tell us what could that look like? What is your company's aims in terms of circularity and sustainable materials?
Yeah. So our kind of straight talk target is that by 2025, we'll have at least 3 of our most commonly purchased products fully circular on the market by then. As part of that, those are really kind of north guiding stars to help us work through the challenges. I like to joke with teams internally. I like to think of it internally as though I always wish I had a light up board of a circle. And when we're talking about the different phases of circularity or the different solutions, we could kind of light it up, because there's so much to figure out, as we all know, along that value chain. And so through the lens of 3 common products, we're working toward getting products that are fully circular in the market, but also learning a lot of other learning and working through the challenges, both the tech solutions and the other solutions that will impact all of our products long term and start to get us to a place of working toward fully circular products down the road as we get there. There's a lot of infrastructure needed. There's a lot of investment in innovations and getting those innovations to scale within the supply chain that are critical. But that's how we think about it. And regenerate materials is absolutely a key stepping stone for that. So if you don't have a very sustainable fiber or recycled fiber, for us, we're looking into, we work closely, one of our partners is Fashion for Good. And so they announced about a month ago or so, a big project with a number of chemical recycling companies that are recycling textiles, breaking down the blends with a chemical process to test and see how you can take old garments, turn them into new. So that's for us an example of a technology that really needs to mature and then scale for us to be able to get circular products on the market in a broad way.
You mentioned chemicals, you mentioned recycling infrastructure. Actually, all of you mentioned so many different issues. And I think that really brings us also to the next question in terms of the interconnectedness of the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework of action, and actually looking at the fashion supply chain in this kind of holistic way to see how many of the Sustainable Development Goals are really actually affected, from poverty reduction to sustainable consumption to climate action. So as a fashion business, your work can, or I mean, as you explained, really focuses on multiple goals. And I want to explore this a little bit more. So Trisha, at Lenzing, I mean, you've been really highlighting the connection to the Sustainable Development Goals for years. And actually we have, at UNECE, we have worked together to produce a little movie, an educational video called Made in Forest, which highlights the alternatives that are out there to polluting and water-intensive materials like cotton and polyester, and just to kind of educate consumers, tell consumers to look a bit more beyond the label, beyond what is in their clothes and so on, to just kind of spark that a little action. So since Lenzing is mainly sourcing from forests, of course, Sustainable Development Goal 15 is really relevant here. And you have recently also made an announcement about SDG 13 on climate action. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. And it's amazing because I think we worked on that forest video almost 2 years ago now. It seems, and yet it was so right, and it still is perfect for the times where we're at now. And at Lenzing, we do look at all of the SDGs, but certainly hone in on certain ones more specifically. And recently, I would say we've really been highlighting SDG 13 for climate action. It actually goes back to 2018 when we signed the UNFCCC, which is the Fashion Charter for Climate Change. And that agreement, that collaboration was based off of having 30% CO2 reduction by 2030. Lenzing actually set a goal higher than that and said we want to get to 50% reduction by 2030. And we started then to build many more initiatives around climate action, including the fact of being net zero by 2050. And I think over the past couple of months, we've heard many more companies talking about going to net zero. And I'm hearing more around even putting 2040 as the timeline for that. In 2019, Lenzing actually had their approved science-based targets. So again, I'm in marketing and business development. I'm not a scientist, but everything around CO2 and how to reach net zero, anything around carbon reductions, the measurements and the science part is so important. And so Lenzing was the first fiber company to set those science-based targets and have them approved in 2019. So that led us to thinking if we're looking as a company about what we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, what can we do to bring it down to a product level? And that's where we said, all right, we have this amazing integrated production site. Jad has been there. Sam, we have to get you over to Austria when we can. And there we are using every part of the tree. So there's a high efficiency. We take the cellulose from the tree, We also have about 50% of the tree is actually burned for renewable energy. So we're able to run our large production facility just off of the energy from the tree. And there we were able to have a high reduction in CO2, as well as we look at any other way that we can reduce, and that includes throughout the supplier supply chain partners, our raw material partners for us. So we have reduction, we have engagement, and then we do have some offsets that we need to incorporate to reach zero. So we are able to have a tensile lyocell and a tensile modal fiber that is certified as true carbon zero. And that was what we launched in September as our latest fiber innovation in the market. So we're looking forward to working together with the market. And I think this brings Lenzing in a leadership position where you don't see a lot of raw material suppliers that are able to achieve this at this time.
Thanks, Trisha. And I think also you mentioned the science-based targets, which also Sam has touched upon, and I think that's really the most important actually when you talk about all these commitments, all these goals. You need a way to measure them. You need a way to actually tell people, okay, this is, you know, we are adhering to scientific and not just defining sustainability ourselves. I think that's also often a problem where the term just, you know, becomes watered down because a lot of people use it, but with the science-based targets or with the specific framework, we actually know also how to measure them. And this leads me a bit also back again to Sam. You mentioned this forward fashion vision. How exactly does it connect to the goals? Which goals? And also how do you use the science-based targets as a framework to achieve this vision?
Sure. So honestly, if I could sit and go through every one of the 17 and we find a connection point to all of them, there's some that I think just tend to lead us more, sometimes because they're more central to a certain stakeholder conversation. So for example, our water stewardship work, which we partner very closely with WWF on, and the CEO Water Mandate, discussion around that SDG, I think SDG 6 around water is very prevalent. I think with respect to climate, you know, really the process of going through and creating a science-based target, which is a process, but highly worthwhile, and connecting that to science. And we're also connected to the United Nations, the Fashion Climate Change Initiative. So our alignment is there. It's very, now achieving that science-based target is very central to how we go forward. When we think about that work and other work across SDGs, and I think it relates a lot to, and I'm talking a little bit more from an environmental standpoint, because I think there's a human piece of this also that's easy to just kind of leave on the table. But I'll just say, you know, can't have the human element, or you don't want to be producing in facilities that don't have strong human rights practices to equate to what you're trying to drive on the environmental side. So a little side note there. But as we think about our science-based target and the climate work, we are also thinking about this drive around the natural world, we're hearing a lot of dialogue around the natural world, biodiversity. We're members of the Fashion Pact, which is starting to drive more forward with biodiversity and saying, what should a science-based target be? And so I think we're really trying now to look for ways to connect our work and climate, both in owned and operated, in the supply chain, and as we look at the material choices we're driving, to other work we're driving that relates to biodiversity. So through our deforestation policy, and we work with Canopy, through the more sustainable viscose we're trying to procure, through the work we're doing with water stewardship in some of the sourcing, the communities that we're in, where there's a lot of water pollution and need to lean in and benefit the local biodiversity there, being the water, and then in some cases the animals and the vegetation. So we're trying to, I think we're in a phase of figuring out how to connect all those points of the natural world and and the biodiversity story to the climate story without making it too confusing for different stakeholders and consumers. And I think this is a little bit of the story of the SDGs as well, because there's so many overlaps. We find ourselves in a lot of conversations at the end of the day, we say, oh, SDG 17 partnership is what it's all about. It's all encompassing. You need the internal, external partnerships. You need them cross industry, cross sector. So that's how we're thinking about it, and trying to use SDGs to hold ourselves accountable and call out when when we're challenging ourselves, measuring and showing improvements in SDGs, but then also trying to think about how the conversations intersect in a meaningful and clear way for different stakeholders.
I'm totally with you on the SDG 17 there, on the partnerships. I mean, that's also part of the reason we're having this conversation, I guess. Moving on to Jed, I think we haven't really talked about SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. And you've talked a lot about materials science, about researching new materials and how you're using them, how you're communicating about them. I think, well, in my opinion, I guess also like it's important to know where these materials come from, that they're traceable. You mentioned also certification. Can you talk to us a bit more, about transparency and traceability? Is this a really important aspect of your work, or not so much because you already, like, it's a very simple supply chain, or, tell us.
Sure. No, absolutely. We believe in traceability, and we feel like since we're a young company, a fast-growing company, we've got the opportunity and the responsibility to build our supply chain correctly the right way the first time. And so we've got a little bit more freedom, where we're not trying to clean up something that's been around for decades. We can have a initial high hurdle of let's not start this unless we can really trace and have a deep relationship with who we're working with, starting at going several levels back, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, all the way to raw materials. As Trisha mentioned at Lensing, we've been there several times and view that as incredibly important to really be able to speak with authenticity about being really tight with knowing exactly where your materials are coming from, letting a partner like Lensing know what's important to us, and continuing to work with them, not just for POs and just a commercial transaction, but actually talking about, hey, how can we continue to work together to make this even better? And we're really excited about their announcement about the True Carbon Zero fibers, because that's really that's our whole strategy, kind of in a nutshell. Is we've tried to take a very confusing world of sustainability and simplify it. We're all about simplifying naturally. And so for us, we've made carbon our number one target. Climate change is our number one goal, and carbon as our number one target. And that's why we put a scorecard now on every one of our products. So we feel like you should know the carbon impact of your products, of all your products. But right now you can start with Allbirds products, all of our shoes, all of our apparel, all of our future products. They have a carbon score right there, full life cycle analysis of the carbon footprint of every product. And we think that's required because it's really confusing out there. And there's, one of the goals for SDG 12 is by 2030, ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. I mean, that's almost a mission statement for our company. So we're trying to live that every day, but it starts with awareness for the customer, and then that becomes a public accountability that helps us. We were already using those life cycle analyses, the carbon footprint, the climate change impact of our products as a way to help design them. But once you put them out for the public, it's a whole different level of accountability. And so we need to trace everything. We study the life cycle analysis of all our products. It helps us look for waste in the system. It helps us look for inefficient transport. But it becomes this, it actually kind of clarifies things, and it starts helping you figure out where do we spend our time? Where does the sustainability team make an impact? Well, let's follow the carbon, right? And that's what we do. And what we've seen by far in footwear and apparel, it's the materials and the manufacturing. And so we align our efforts primarily with that as a priority, while we still look at the entire life cycle. But we want to be clear. We think climate change is the issue of our generation. We think carbon is a big challenge for footwear and apparel, and it's something we nominate 100% of our materials, right? So there are a lot of challenges with other elements of the supply chain, but materials, we've got control of that. So we're going to do everything we can to get that number down and give our customers the information so they can make choices, just like nutrition facts or calories on food.
I was just about to say that I read that somewhere that Allbirds wants people to understand the carbon footprint of their sneakers, like the calories in the food. And I think that's what that's really what it is about, like consumer education, making it as simple as possible, because it is such a complex world, it's such a complex issue. But Trisha, I wanted to come back to you, because I mean, we get that also sometimes in our work, that people are quite worried when we talk about wood products, cutting down trees to make clothes. How do you communicate to them the value of sourcing from sustainably managed forests, and what really sustainable fiber production is actually about creating value of forest ecosystems and so on? How do you do that? Is that a challenge for you?
Yeah, I have to say now that there's many more platforms to communicate this, and also the checks and balances within the system. So initially, when I first started working with Tencel, people were, you can't be cutting down trees, that has to be bad. But actually it can be done in a responsible way, working through certification programs like FSC that Jad mentioned. We also work with PEFC, and work within responsible suppliers, also with the Canopy, where we have the ranking as the leading dark green shirt. So there is much more happening around checks and balances. And then what we try to do is we work with our partners, with the brands and retailers, to communicate that. And we've done a couple of campaigns that have particularly been very successful. One of them is Make It Feel Right, which is a hashtag also. We've had over 80 million impressions of this campaign. And it's about, reading what your garments are made of, understanding. So similar to how, Jad was talking about how they have their carbon footprint, educating the consumer around this. We also had a couple other campaigns just to highlight the Feel So Right campaign. And this one we're doing in partnership with brands, again, to educate what's the value of our ingredient brand, Tencel. And then we've run some very successful Earth Month campaigns. And we did one in collaboration with One Tree Planted. So not only do we use the trees to make our fiber, but hear how we can give back and plant new trees, and really connecting that. And actually with that campaign that we ran for 1 month, we were able to raise enough money to actually plant, it was 22,000 trees, which is actually more than all the trees in Central Park in New York City. So it was really a great campaign to raise awareness, connect with our brand partners, SDG 17 all around, as well as planting more trees with our partner, One Tree Planted. So those are some of the ways that we've been able to communicate.
And planting trees is always a good, a very visible thing to do, which it's really good to also involve a broad range of people, which actually we at UNECE are doing with cities. So that's an interesting example that you gave there as well. Sam, I read, we've talked about now fibers, innovation in materials and so on. The use phase of garments is also has quite a high impact, like in terms of climate impact, washing at high temperatures and so on. And you always have these descriptions in the, on the label.
Yeah.
But what does PVH do really to educate consumers about generally lowering the carbon impact? Is that something that you look into? Is there also a focus on developing innovative products in that regard?
Yeah, so, and maybe I'll take a step back too and just mention, I think first on the consumer communications point, actually every time I hear the nutritional label, I almost 16 years ago was working with a brand that that started the concept of trying to put nutritional labels on a shoebox. And that kind of became a lot of the foundation for the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's work to create tools to measure environmental performance. And now SAC, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, being 10 years old, I maybe jokingly or like to say there's 10 years of development of measurement tools. And as we go to this decade of action, how do we take that information in those tools, highly credible, environmentally sound information, and translate that to be consumer facing? So I was just, it's so cool to kind of hear the whole circle and hear how Jad was speaking about it. So I think first and foremost is we're thinking about how do you communicate with this consumer. We're leaning into using those tools and or other points or attributes we can talk about that are based on certifications. And the more streamlined and consistent for consumers, the better, because it's a really confusing language. There's short attention spans. And what we're seeing, especially even in the midst of COVID, is an increasing demand from consumers and wholesale customers, but there's different shades of consumer interest and attention span and engagement for how deep they want to go, especially, in some ways I'm super envious of Jad's portfolio, a little bit more of a streamlined portfolio. Ours is a little bigger and broader and has kind of a broader portfolio of products and customers. But I think just wanted to call out first on that consumer facing piece, thinking about communications that are standardized and can become standardized. And we're doing a lot of work with the SAC, with H&M and Zalando to try to take all the insights from those tools, turn them into a consumer facing communication that's simple. So we've been doing some work around that, that I think ultimately it generates consumer awareness. It's based on insights that are coming from traceable systems increasingly, or trace information that's traced increasingly, that's meant to generate consumer awareness overall. I think then as it gets to the use phase, honestly, it's one to tap into more, I think, across our industry. We've done and tested some different things with care labels and are looking at that care label piece. And there's been, I think, some interesting research and different tests throughout our industry as to what works or what does not work. It's also an interesting example of a place to really consider unique partnerships in SDG 17. So because the consumer's engagement with washing their clothes doesn't just happen with the garment, or the dress, for example, right? It happens with the washing machines and the detergents. And so I think that's a really cool example where if we can get really constructive as an industry to work cross industry and drive consistent messaging, because consumer behavior change takes a lot to drive. But we've been through COVID, found it really interesting in watching the consumer data just to see the increased interest around even looking at the resale models and some of the kind of the new business models and seeing where that leads. So I think it's a space to watch, and then one to continue to lean into, and for companies to be able to evaluate what will really work to impact consumer behavior.
I would love to continue this conversation, but we have actually reached our time in our discussion on Innovative by Nature. So it's been a real pleasure and real honor to be talking to all of you. So it's great to have had this opportunity to bring all of us together. And of course, a really big thank you to all of you, all of the panelists, for taking the time, and to those watching right now. It's been great.